In this video, I'm going to tell you about 5 pieces of upcoming camera gear that I'm excited about for wildlife photography. This is 5 for Friday. Hey guys, I hope you're all doing well. There's something going on globally right now that's pretty hard to ignore, and that's the COVID-19 coronavirus. I really hope that you and anyone you know is in good health. COVID-19 is definitely affecting a lot of travel. I'm personally trying to figure out what I'm going to do about some of my travel plans for this year. If COVID-19 is affecting your travel, I also wish you the best of luck in figuring out your plans. This video is about gear. COVID-19 is also affecting the camera manufacturing activities. If you're thinking about buying a new camera or new lens in 2020, one of the new releases, you may want to keep in mind that due to COVID-19, the availability of some of those new cameras and lenses might be limited. So if there's something that you really want, you might want to get on pre-order lists early if you can. I want to tell you about 5 upcoming releases that I'm excited about and that you might want to be aware of if you're not already aware of them. Now, except for a couple of small mentions, everything I'll talk about in this video has been announced by manufacturers, so we're not just talking about rumors. All right, let's get started. So first up, let's talk Canon, the EOS R5. It's been announced by Canon. Now, even though I'm mostly a Sony shooter, I'm excited about this camera. I'm curious to see what Canon does, and any success they have with this camera or any other mirrorless camera is sure to push Sony to do better. And that's a good thing. However, there's a few things to note about this camera. The first thing is that apparently, according to rumors, this is not the high-end mirrorless camera that Canon intends to have in their lineup alongside cameras like the 1DX Mark III or to replace the 1DX Mark III. That high-end mirrorless camera, which is apparently known as the R1, will come sometime later. So we may hear about it towards, say, the end of 2020. However, to be clear, Canon has said nothing official about this. Secondly, as I mentioned in a previous video, I think animal eye autofocus is a notable feature for wildlife photographers. And I don't believe the EOS R5 will have any kind of animal eye AF when it's released. Now, it's possible Canon could release it in a future firmware update, just as Sony and Nikon did. And finally, one of the things to remember with these EOS R cameras is that right now there are no RF long prime lenses, native lenses for these cameras. And Canon released their RF lens roadmap this month, and there are no long primes scheduled to be released in 2020. The only thing they're going to release this year that has long reach is a 100 to 500 zoom, which is f7.1 at the long end. So it appears that if you get one of these cameras, you're going to have to rely on legacy Canon glass for at least the next year or so. It is worth noting, however, that Canon is going to release 1.4x and 2x teleconverters for the RF mount, and that's something that Nikon have yet to do for the Z mount or Z mount. So let's talk about Sony, and let's start with the 20mm f1.8 that was just announced. It's going to be released on March 6th. I've already pre-ordered one. Now, right now, I use the Sony 24G Master a lot, including for a lot of my YouTube videos, and I love it. It's a stellar performer, small package. However, there are often times when I want something wider, but something that still has autofocus and a big aperture and is small and light for travel. According to the early reviews of the 20mm that I've seen, it has a lot of the same qualities as the 24G Master, and it's smaller, lighter, less expensive. So I'm super excited about it. Now, it doesn't look like it's as sharp as the 24G Master in the corners, and there's a little more filled curvature with this 20mm lens, but I think that may be a price that I'm willing to pay for something that has a wider angle and is a smaller and lighter package. What's particularly interesting is that this is an example of a lens that is a Sony G lens that comes very close to a GM lens. If you're not familiar with what I'm talking about, Sony has a GM line of lenses and a G line of lenses, and some other lenses. The GM lenses or G master lenses are the top lenses where Sony spares no cost. They're just trying to deliver the best possible lens. The G lenses make some compromises, but if you look at lenses like this new 20 f1.8, as well as some previous lenses like the 200 to 600 and the 24 to 105, those are G lenses that show that they can come pretty close to the G master lenses without the high price. Now let's talk about the Tamron 70 to 180 for Sony E-mount. This is a lens I've mentioned previously. What gets me particularly excited now is that the autofocus performance looks like it might be really good. This is a short clip of what is apparently a test of this lens, and it looks like the AF performance is blazingly fast. Now I shoot all primes, but I could see myself getting this lens. In this focal range, I usually shoot the Sony 135 G Master, and when you compare this lens to that, this Tamron 70 to 180 is a little bit lighter. The physical size is longer, a little bit longer, but it's also not as wide in diameter. Now, of course, the Tamron is f2.8, which is 1 1/3 stops slower than the 135 G Master. But on the other hand, you get 45 millimeters more in reach in the focal length, and you get the flexibility of a zoom. So I'm expecting that this Tamron 70 to 180 is going to be a super hot item, unless of course the performance doesn't live up to expectations, and we hope that that's not the case. And finally, on the Sony front, let's talk about the Sony 100 f1.4. So okay, this is just a rumor at this stage, but what gives me some hope here is that this rumor originates with a patent that Sony filed early in 2019. And they filed that patent around the same time that they filed a patent for a lens which was a 135 f1.8. And we now know that that patent is for what became the Sony 135 G Master lens. And that was released in April 2019, so just a few months after they filed these patents. So it's possible that the 100 f1.4, that the patent for that represents a real lens that is under development right now. Now, I've previously mentioned the Sigma 105 f1.4, which is this beast right here. I love this lens. This is fantastic. It's as sharp as the Sony 135 GM, almost as sharp at lower resolutions. The lens rentals guys tested it and they found at higher resolutions it's actually sharper than the 135 GM, and that's saying a lot. Those of you who have the 135 GM know how sharp it is, and I've shown some samples from it in previous videos. Unfortunately, I often leave this at home. I don't take it on trips with me because it's heavy and it's big. It's a beast. But, and this is why I'm excited, I have no doubt that if Sony releases a 100 f1.4, it will be smaller and lighter than this Sigma 105. Finally, let's talk about Fuji. Yes, Fuji. So Fuji announced the XT4, and it's in production now. Now, Fuji did say that because of the coronavirus, the release, which is scheduled for April, may be delayed. Now, generally speaking, I think that you can use the Fuji X cameras for wildlife photography, and I've seen some great images taken with those cameras and the X lenses. However, I don't think the system is as attractive for wildlife photographers as the offerings from Sony or Canon or Nikon. One of the reasons is that there are no long primes in their lineup, except for a 200 f2, which is equivalent to a 300 f2.8. And if you look at the roadmap for the lenses in the XF lineup, there are no long primes scheduled for release in 2020. So why do I think that the XT4 is an interesting camera? Well, it's really because I think it does look like a stellar performer, and what gets me excited is the possibility that it may push some of the other manufacturers like Sony or Canon or Nikon to release some higher end APS-C mirrorless bodies. Let's face it, if you look at the most recent Sony a6000 releases, if you look at the Z50 or the Z50 from Nikon, none of those are really particularly exciting. Now, I did say that I don't think the Fuji X system is super interesting for wildlife photographers, although it's still interesting. But Fuji does have another system that I think is interesting, although it's very niche. And the system I'm talking about is the GFX system. If you're not familiar with this, it's based on a large format sensor, which is bigger than a full frame sensor, but not as large as the medium format sensors you get in cameras like those from Phase 1. The GFX system includes this beast, the GFX 100, which I'm testing right now. This baby has 100 megapixels. It's got IBIS, tracking autofocus, and some pretty cool ergonomics. So I'm hoping to be able to tell you more about this camera in a future video. By the way, in the last video, I mentioned that I would make a video about dealing with difficult lighting, and I'm hoping to push that out next week, so stay tuned. Well, that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.